So picture a kid aggressively wrestling their sibling on the living room floor right after watching a violent Saturday morning cartoon.
Oh, yeah, the classic example. Or, teenagers mimicking some dangerous stunt they just saw in a huge blockbuster movie.
Exactly. I mean, when most of us hear the phrase media effects, that is exactly what we picture. We think of these immediate, obvious, and, well, usually negative reactions.
Right, it's always the bad stuff that catches our attention.
It is. It's kind of the equivalent of only paying attention to the weather when there is a Category 5 hurricane ripping off a roof. We watch the destruction, we track the impact, and we think we understand the climate.
But we completely ignore the everyday sunshine, or like the slow, silent erosion of a coastline over decades.
Yeah, those quiet forces are actually shaping the landscape much more fundamentally than a single storm, but they're entirely invisible to us because they just feel like normal life. So, for this deep dive to completely rewire how you think about the way media affects you, we have to map out those hidden weather systems.
Because if you are only looking for the hurricane, the bad behavior right after the cartoon, you are missing the vast majority of the ways you are constantly being influenced.
Right. And to be genuinely well-informed in a world where you are constantly swimming in messages, you need a much broader framework, right?
Absolutely. Media researchers, they don't just look for bad behavior, they track influence across 8 core issues. And understanding these 8 dimensions is what allows you to actually see the machinery of media influence operating right under the surface.
Well, let's pull apart the first two, because they are essentially massive traps that keep people focused on the hurricane. We naturally assume that media influence is always inherently bad and that it's always purposefully designed to change us.
Yeah, researchers call those concepts valence and intention. Let's start with valence, which is really just a fancy way of categorizing an effect as either positive or negative.
And the everyday assumption is that media effects are negative, right?
Wow.
I mean, we hear endless debates about screen time leading to antisocial behavior.
We do, but media exerts massive positive effects that we simply take for granted as normal functioning. Like, we acquire critical knowledge, we trigger pleasant emotional states with music to regulate our moods, we build communities.
Oh, right. I guess we don't think of those as effects because they're just, well, helpful.
Exactly. The psychological mechanisms at play are completely neutral. It is the context that determines if the valence is positive or negative. A perfect example of this from the research is desensitization.
Yeah. Okay, desensitization, like losing your sensitivity to something.
Right. Biologically, desensitization is just your brain habituating to a repeated stimulus so it can conserve cognitive energy. It stops sending alarm signals every time it encounters something familiar.
And in a negative context, I mean, that looks like someone watching years and years of violent television.
Yeah.
And their brain simply stops sending those empathic alarm signals.
Yes, exactly.
They lose their natural inclination to feel sympathy for real-world victims because their neurological response has just been worn down over time.
Yeah.
That is a deeply negative valence.
It is. But take that exact same biological mechanism, desensitization, and place it in a clinical therapist's office.
Okay, I'm with you.
Imagine a patient with a crippling irrational fear of air travel. Their brain is sending massive, unnecessary alarm signals. A therapist might repeatedly show that patient television programs featuring people happily boarding planes, smiling, enjoying the flight, landing safely.
Oh, wow. So they're using the media to wear down the fear.
Exactly. Over time, the patient's fear response is exhausted. They are desensitized to their fear. The media has rewired their threat response, resulting in an incredibly positive valence. The mechanism is identical. It's just the outcome that changes.
That's fascinating. Which brings us to the second trap. Intention. It is very common to hear Hollywood producers defend violent movies by claiming they merely intend to entertain.
Right, the classic, it's just a movie defense.
Yeah. They argue that because they aren't actively trying to teach anyone to be violent, they aren't responsible for any negative behavioral fallout, or even that it shouldn't be classified as a true media effect.
Which is incredibly misleading.
But, I mean, let me push back a little. If a media creator didn't intend to cause an effect, and you, the viewer sitting on your couch, didn't ask for that effect, calling it a core media influence feels a bit like a stretch, doesn't it? Isn't that just an accidental side effect? Like a glitch in the matrix?
Well, in the realm of media studies, intent simply does not negate impact. The cognitive or behavioral shift happens regardless of what the creator or the consumer wanted.
So the intention is kind of irrelevant to the actual result.
Exactly. Think about the physics of a car accident. It genuinely doesn't matter that the other driver didn't intend to run a red light and hit you. Your car is still dented, and you still have to deal with the physical reality of the crash.
That makes perfect sense.
If we only track intentional outcomes, we leave ourselves completely blind to the unintended consequences that are constantly shaping our culture. You cannot reject an influence if you refuse to acknowledge it exists simply because it wasn't part of someone's marketing plan.
The dent in the car is real either way. So if we discard the idea that effects are only the obvious, intentional, negative things, the next obvious question is how we actually spot them.
Right. Where do they show up?
Yeah, if they aren't the hurricane, they must be hiding in the timeline of our lives somewhere, which introduces the next cluster of core issues from the text. That's timing, duration, and manifestation.
Timing and duration dictate the actual life cycle of an influence. Timing is strictly about when the effect starts.
So like how fast it hits you.
Exactly. Is it immediate, meaning it occurs right during the exposure, or mere seconds afterward? Or is it long-term, taking months or years of gradual, repeated exposure before any evidence of an effect finally surfaces?
Okay, got it. And duration.
Duration, on the other hand, measures how long that effect sticks around once it has started.
A great way to visualize this, I think, is to imagine someone, let's call her Cindy, listening to a brand new song on her phone.
Yeah.
She hears the chorus and she immediately starts humming along.
Right, that is an immediate timing effect.
But the duration is the variable, right? She might memorize the lyrics for the afternoon, but by tomorrow her brain has discarded that information to make room for something else. That is a temporary duration.
Precisely. Alternatively, that specific song might play during a highly emotional moment in Cindy's life, maybe a first date or a moment of profound grief.
Oh, so the context locks it in.
Yes, her brain heavily encodes the media stimulus alongside that powerful emotion, and she remembers those lyrics vividly for the rest of her life. That is a permanent duration. So you can have immediate temporary effects, immediate permanent effects, and long-term variations of both.
But the variable that truly obscures how media influences us is manifestation. I mean, this is the dividing line between an observable effect and a latent effect.
Right, and this is where it gets really tricky.
Because an observable effect is the easiest to study, since it generates a direct behavioral output. Imagine someone watching television and seeing a commercial for a limited-time pizza deal. They pick up their phone, call the number, and order the pizza.
The advertiser intended to sell food, the viewer changed their behavior, and anyone standing in the room could observe the transaction happening. It's visible.
But latent effects, however, are happening entirely under the surface. They are incredibly difficult to observe, but that does not mean the influence isn't occurring.
Not at all. A latent effect is the slow building of cognitive structures, brick by brick, exposure by exposure.
To put this in perspective for you listening, think of an observable immediate effect like getting a scraped knee. You fall down on the pavement, you see the physical damage, you know exactly what caused it and exactly when it happened.
Right, very clear cause and effect.
But a latent long-term effect is much more like a slowly developing allergy. You might be continually exposed to a certain environment or a certain pollen, and on the surface, you feel absolutely nothing.
You think you're perfectly fine.
Yeah. But microscopically, your immune system is slowly rewiring its entire threat response matrix. You don't realize your internal systems have been fundamentally altered until years later when a tiny exposure suddenly triggers a massive reaction.
That is a brilliant analogy. The media is constantly rewiring your cognitive immune system, which leads to what might be the most counterintuitive concept in this entire framework.
Oh, the no change concept.
Yes, we naturally demand observable changes to prove that an influence happened. We look for the scraped knee. But the fourth core issue change reveals that the most powerful media effect of all might be when absolutely nothing changes.
The difference between a change effect and a no difference effect. If we only look for a shift in behavior, we are entirely missing the massive amount of reinforcement happening every single day.
Exactly. Advertisers don't always want to change you.
Right. If you already buy their brand of toothpaste, their goal is to continually add psychological weight to your current habit. They want to reinforce your existing brand loyalty so deeply that it becomes an automatic reflex, completely impervious to any competitor's messaging.
They're essentially paving over the neural pathways you already use so that alternative choices feel increasingly difficult to make.
But I have to push back on the idea that no difference is an active effect. I mean, if I am standing perfectly still in an open field and the wind isn't moving me, how can we categorize that as an effect? I haven't changed position.
Think about the actual physics of standing in an open field during a heavy gale force wind. If that wind is pushing forcefully against your chest and you are standing perfectly still, are you unaffected?
Well, no.
Right. You are burning a massive amount of internal energy just bracing yourself to hold your ground. Your leg muscles are tense, your core is engaged, your posture is leaning into the pressure.
Oh, man, if the wind suddenly stopped, I'd literally fall forward onto my face.
Exactly. Your habits, your deeply held beliefs, your consumer loyalties are continually being braced by media reinforcement. The media is constantly supplying the atmospheric pressure that keeps your habits standing in place. If you ignore reinforcement simply because there is no visible change in your outward behavior, your perspective is simply too narrow.
The energy spent bracing against the environment. That is a brilliant way to visualize it. So if we are standing in this environment bracing against the wind, we also have to look at how that wind reaches us.
Which is the difference between direct and indirect effect.
Right. A direct effect is a straight line. You see a political advertisement outlining a candidate's platform, you align with their ideas, and you go directly to the voting booth and cast your ballot for them. Direct path from media to behavior.
But the indirect paths reveal the sheer systemic infrastructural power of media. Media doesn't just act on people, it acts on systems, which then act on people.
Give us an example of that.
Consider the mechanical chain of indirect effects generated by the political ecosystem. Constant political advertising across every platform drives up the baseline financial cost of running a campaign. The airwaves are saturated, so securing visibility requires massive capital.
Which forces candidates into a corner. They can't just campaign on ideas. They have to spend a huge chunk of their daily schedule just dialing for dollars to afford the media buys.
And the entities capable of supplying that massive capital are usually large organizations, political action committees, or wealthy donors. The candidate naturally becomes financially reliant on those specific groups to stay competitive.
And obviously that financial reliance is going to shape the actual legislation and policies they advocate for once they secure office. I mean, they have to keep the financial pipeline open for the next election cycle.
Precisely. And those heavily influenced policies then dictate how governmental services are funded, structured, and delivered to the public at large.
So even if you, the person listening to this right now, never watch a single political ad, never log onto a social media platform, and entirely ignore the campaign cycle, your local schools, your infrastructure, and your tax structures are all tangibly impacted.
You didn't consume the media, but the media fundamentally altered the ecosystem, and you have to live in that altered ecosystem.
That is wild. That is the essence of an indirect effect. It is a multi-stage chain reaction. Which brings us perfectly to the final and most expansive core issue, level. Yeah.
Level. Because all of these invisible, reinforcing, and indirect paths are operating simultaneously, but they're doing so on completely different scales.
We divide media effects into the micro level, which focuses on the individual human being, and the macro level, which tracks the public, society, and large-scale institutions. Let's zoom all the way in on the micro level first.
Okay. Media researchers have identified exactly 6 distinct channels through which media touches an individual human being. The first channel is cognitions.
So, like facts and information.
Yes, but it isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about how the media sets the agenda for what your brain even considers worth thinking about. It provides the raw data your brain uses to categorize the world.
Makes sense. What's the second channel?
The second channel is beliefs, which is fundamentally different from a cognition. A belief requires a leap of faith. It is your acceptance that something is real or true, even if you have never personally experienced it.
Like historical figures.
Exactly. You have a rock-solid belief that George Washington existed. You've never met him, you haven't seen him breathe, yet your brain accepts him as an absolute reality, primarily because you have consumed books, documentaries, and historical media about him. The media constructs the boundaries of our historical and social reality.
That's powerful. And the third channel?
The third is attitudes. These are your evaluative judgments. Our brains need cognitive shortcuts to navigate complex social situations, so we rely on media to help us frame who is the hero, who is the villain, what is an acceptable standard of beauty, or what constitutes success.
The media provides the framing that shapes our internal judgments. Okay, then we have the fourth channel, affect.
Right, affect. This refers to our emotions and our moods.
So this is like when a piece of media bypasses your logical processing and directly stimulates your limbic system,
Yeah.
making you cry over a fictional character's death or feeling profound joy when a movie's protagonist finally wins.
Exactly. And the fifth channel is perhaps the most primal, physiology. These are your automatic, autonomic bodily responses.
Like your heart racing.
Yes. When you watch a high-stress, suspenseful thriller, your brain's amygdala essentially misfires. We evolved to pump adrenaline when we see a physical predator in the wild. The amygdala struggles to differentiate between a real threat in the room and a highly realistic cinematic threat on a screen.
Oh, wow. So your heart rate actually increases.
Your blood pressure elevates, your palms literally sweat. The media is triggering a hardwired physiological fight-or-flight response in your physical body, even though you are completely safe on your couch.
That is incredible. And finally, the sixth channel is behaviors, the actual overt physical actions you take in the real world, like ordering the pizza or casting the vote.
Right. And what's crucial to understand is that behavioral change is often just the final domino to fall after your cognitions, beliefs, attitudes, affect, and physiology have already been quietly altered.
So those are the 6 micro-level channels. But when we zoom out to the macro level, we are looking at massive entities, right? The court system, the education system, religion, and the public as a singular aggregate force.
Yes, the concept of the public as an aggregate is vital here. Public opinion is not merely a math equation where you tally up 600 people who support a law and 400 who oppose it.
More than just a head count.
Much more. Sociologically, aggregate public opinion creates a normative structural pressure that has a life of its own. If you find out that one random person in a different state supports a controversial new policy, it probably doesn't affect you.
Right.
But if the media constantly broadcasts polling data showing that 80% of the entire public supports that policy, that aggregate weight creates a new social reality. It exerts a gravitational pull that forces institutions, politicians, and corporations to adapt their behavior to survive.
But mechanically, how does that work when we compare it to the individual? I mean, we just broke down the 6 microchannels, and one of them was physiology, the sweaty palms and elevated heart rate.
Right.
If media causes a physiological response in me, does it cause one in an institution? Like, does the education system get sweaty palms? Does the Supreme Court have a fight-or-flight response?
Well, no. You cannot anthropomorphize an institution. This is a trap even seasoned observers fall into. In media studies, researchers use a matrix called the media effects template to map all of this out.
Okay.
And the template makes it explicitly clear that physiology uniquely applies only to a biological organism. An institution does not have a central nervous system.
So you can't just take the psychological map of an individual and paste it over a sociological structure.
Exactly. You need entirely different scientific methodologies. The macro template tracks how a society's collective knowledge shifts over decades, or how institutional norms and legal practices are forced to change due to cultural pressure, but it completely drops physiology.
It just doesn't apply.
Right. The laboratory methods used to measure galvanic skin response on a person's hand are fundamentally useless when you are trying to study shifting graduation rates across a national education system.
Wow. So to map the weather accurately, you need a thermometer to measure the individual standing in the field, but you need a high-altitude satellite to measure the macro-level pressure systems altering the landscape.
Yes. And the media is operating on both of those levels simultaneously. It is giving you, the individual, an adrenaline spike during a movie, while indirectly driving up campaign costs that alter the governmental services in your city.
So we have taken the severely limited idea of a media effect,
Right.
the hurricane, the kid wrestling after the cartoon, and completely dismantled it.
We have. We now understand that influence isn't just negative or positive. It isn't just intentional. It can happen immediately or take a lifetime to encode.
It can be an obvious behavioral shift or a deeply latent structural change. It can alter your actions, or it can invisibly reinforce your current habits by forcing you to brace against the wind.
It can be a direct transaction or a massive systemic indirect chain reaction.
You are constantly swimming in this media environment. But by understanding these 8 core issues, valence, intention, timing, duration, manifestation, change, direct versus indirect, and level, you have upgraded your awareness.
You really have. You are no longer just looking out the window waiting to see a storm. You actually have a radar.
You can detect when your cognitive structures are being quietly built, when you are being indirectly impacted by a macro-level shift in an institution, or when your deepest beliefs are being shaped over the long term.
And that radar is the ultimate defense mechanism. Media is constantly exerting influence, but human beings always retain the agency to reject that influence and create our own intentional effects.
But there is a catch.
There is. To truly reject an influence, you have to know what it is you are rejecting. You cannot defend against a latent effect if you refuse to acknowledge the timeline it operates on.
Right. If you don't know the wind is blowing, you don't realize you are burning all your energy just to stand still. So we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you navigate your week.
Take a hard look at your strongest daily habits.
The brands you automatically buy, the media platforms you reflexively open, the political or social opinions you hold most tightly. What latent, entirely unobservable media effect is currently reinforcing that habit right now, perfectly masking itself as your own free will?
Are you actually choosing to stand exactly where you are?
Or are you just bracing against the weather?